Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
The Bears tried but couldn't pull off the upset against the Seahawks. Also, the Bengals are not dead yet, but they need a win against the Broncos, and two rookie quarterbacks face off with a trip to the playoffs on the line. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
Well, the final score 6-3 in the year 2024 is pretty unheard of, but we just saw that happen between the Chicago Bears and Seattle Seahawks. Seattle ends up pulling out the victory. Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears on the losing end here with me to talk about the Chicago Bears. And Lauren, I know it's been a tough season all around for Chicago. Head coach firings, people moving all around, and a lot of uncertainty within the organization, even though they had the number one overall pick and they were able to secure Caleb Williams. Let's start with the game. First of all, I know for this Bears team, watching everything that the division has done, which we'll get to, it's been a pretty underwhelming year. I know there were even high expectations after the team acquired Keenan Allen. They have DJ Moore. You bring in a staff and a supporting group around Caleb. Did this game just kind of feel like, yeah, this is an encapsulation of what the 2024 Chicago Bears have been this year?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing about this Bears team is that, like, they find ways to surprise you with how they're going to mess it up. Like, I mean, it's like even this game, the fact that they messed it up in the same way they did earlier in the season is a surprise. Like, right, you thought you fired Matt Eberflus because of the poor late game management against the Lions. And I mean, a series of issues before that, but that was kind of the last straw, and then a lack of accountability afterward. And then you thought, okay, that was the one thing you could count on not happening again. But a 6-3 ball game that ends that way is something a little bit different. It's yet another different type of pain for Bears fans to experience. And you just keep, like crossing it off your bingo card, and the card's getting pretty full at this point.
Yeah, it's brutal. And again, to watch a team lose the same way over and over, it's like the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. But you look at this division, Lauren, as I talked about, this is a loaded NFC North. You got obviously Detroit, Green Bay, Minnesota, all double-digit win teams, all looking like they're going to be very good for the foreseeable future. And you have this Bears team that obviously hopes that Caleb Williams can turn into a star, hopes that they can build a winner around him. But has this almost changed your perception this year of how Chicago has performed and seeing the rest of the division flourish so much that maybe you're the Bears a little further away than you initially thought?
Definitely. I mean, being at 4 wins and on this 10-game losing streak, or whatever it's up to now, they're definitely farther away than we thought. But I also think the feeling was always that even with Eberflus, and when you thought things were going on a different trajectory, that this year was going to be kind of the warm-up year. Caleb Williams' rookie season wasn't supposed to be the year that they jump and become a Super Bowl contender, right? It was supposed to just kind of be a stepping stone type of year. They've obviously gone backwards, but it's not like they went from a team that we thought would win 12 games to a team that wins 4 games. It was more like 8-4, which is still a bad drop. I think it hurts that the Vikings have been even better than anyone expected. We thought the Lions would be pretty good. We thought the Packers might be decent. And it was Bears and Vikings competing for 3rd or 4th place. And that chasm has become so big that it feels like it's a lot longer of a way up to the top when you don't have anybody at the bottom here with you.
Well, a way to start is to get a head coach in that will hopefully be able to be alongside Caleb Williams for the long haul. Chicago will be at the very forefront of that search. And with the talent that's on the team and with a potential superstar quarterback, if all goes right, that can be a decently attractive option for head coaching candidates. I know, Lauren, there have been rumblings about certain names, even certain big names that could be interested in taking the Chicago job. And if you want to put some names on it, you can. But in general, what do you feel like the Chicago Bears need in their next head coach? What do you think is going to help this team for the long haul in terms of what qualities you're looking for in that next head man?
Yeah, we've heard people throw the word around. I mean, the Bears use the phrase leader of men, and I think that doesn't quite encapsulate, right? But it really is a culture type of thing where it's just like there's an organizational stink here that just permeates beyond the head coaching position, right? Like we've seen where like a couple games ago, Jalen Johnson, one of the team captains, played a whole game without having the Captain C patch on his jersey. Like someone in the equipment team just forgot to get a C patch on his jersey. Like there's just such a lack of attention to detail and just everyone being on top of their responsibilities and communicating properly that goes beyond just head coach, offensive coordinator, and quarterback. So like someone needs to be able to come in who can like not just run a football team, but like help run an organization properly. Then on top of that, you need somebody who can actually like operate an offense at a high level and develop a quarterback and keep sort of building him up in that regard. Like that's what everyone's jobs will rely on is Caleb Williams' development, but it's almost bigger than that. Like, you know, so that's why there's still questions about somebody like Ben Johnson from the Lions, where it's like, he's a great offensive coordinator. Can he fix the organization in that way? Whereas somebody like Pete Carroll or maybe Mike Vrabel don't have the offensive chops there and have questions about who they'll hire as offensive coordinator, but maybe you just feel like, can they get some of the simple things right? And then we'll worry about the offensive questions later.
You can stay up to date all year on the Chicago Bears by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Bears on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Your Locked On Sports Today coming up, the Cincinnati Bengals are laying it all on the line against the Broncos. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $500, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And you can go ahead and take a look at the second round of the college football playoff. Despite having already beaten Ohio State, Oregon are 2.5-point underdogs against the Buckeyes in the Rose Bowl. Penn State heads into the Fiesta Bowl favored by 10.5 points over Heisman runner-up Ashton Jeanty and the Boise State Broncos. Both teams are a combined 10-0 in the Fiesta. Despite the larger line, this should be a good one. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Cincinnati Bengals aren't quite out of the playoffs just yet. It's 7-8. They're going to have to win out, and it starts with the Broncos this week. Locked On Bengals hosts Jake Lisco and James Rapien discuss the must-win matchup.
The Cincinnati Bengals going to be trying to keep that offense hot against the Denver Broncos defense that has been ice cold the last handful of weeks. But we're breaking down a number of different key storylines here on today's crossover Thursday edition. Locked On Broncos, Locked On Bengals, as we shift our attention over to the Bengals side of things. Jake's going to bring some big storylines. But before he does, I want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos or Locked On Bengals your first listen of the day every single day. And if you haven't already done so, we appreciate it if you hit subscribe. And Merry Christmas this season to all of you who celebrate. Jake, let's talk about some Bengals storylines for this game, because like you talk about the Broncos from the outside looking in, every Broncos fan that I've talked to, everybody that's in the group chats right now, everybody is absolutely shaking in their boots at the thought of going to Cincinnati and playing against this offense because of the way that Denver's defense has been really uninspiring since the Cleveland game a handful of weeks ago. And folks are wondering, like, did Cleveland expose some stuff at the Broncos defense? Like, teams are now taking advantage. Sean Payton made it sound like the stuff against the Chargers and the Browns and stuff was just busted coverage, but you have busted coverage enough weeks in a row, you start to wonder, is this kind of just who we are? What are the Bengals side of this? You know, as we look into this game offensively for the Bengals, what's the biggest storyline going up against Denver?
Well, it continues to be whether the offense can do what they need to do to try to drag this team and keep their playoff hopes alive. And those playoff hopes are slim, but like you've heard about the Denver Broncos probably quite a bit since that Chargers game, at least I've had it mentioned to me quite a bit on social media, is that these teams struggle when playing against good teams. Well, as Denver has one win against a team with a winning record, while the Bengals have 0. In fact, they have the lowest strength of victory in the NFL this year, and it would have also been by far the lowest last year. And there's some quirks there. The Bengals have either played playoff teams or teams picking in the top 6 for the most part this year. The only team in the middle that they've played really all year are the Dallas Cowboys. But the way they've won games, when they've won games against these bad teams, is one, the defense has been a litmus test for bad quarterbacks. We'll talk about the defense in a minute, but primarily it's been Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Chase Brown doing Superman stuff, sometimes literally, if you look at last week's touchdown pass to T. Higgins and T. Higgins' postgame comments, and willing this team to either be in games or just doing what they need to do against bad teams to open up a big enough gap that there's pressure off on the defense. And that's gone a little bit differently in the last few weeks, but the offense is still certainly the driver for this team. And going into that Chargers game, for example, heard a lot that week about how the Chargers had this incredible scoring defense all year. And then the Bengals put 27 up on the Chargers and probably should have won that game. And there are other teams that have had good defenses this year that haven't mattered when they've played against the Bengals. The very next week, they scored 38 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the only team that has really significantly slowed them down in a game that the Bengals weren't controlling were the Philadelphia Eagles much earlier this season, outside of a weird week 1 game where Joe Burrow wasn't himself against the New England Patriots. So Joe Burrow, in the opinion of those that have watched him closely, playing at an MVP level this year. You have a player playing at an Offensive Player of the Year level in Jamar Chase, who looks to be tracking toward that triple crown for wide receivers, and a running back that's kind of come out of nowhere to provide an element for this team. Not out of nowhere if you're really paying attention to the Bengals, but maybe for Broncos fans, and Chase Brown, who adds an explosive element in the run game and has really come a long way in the passing game. It's been one of the most proficient pass rushers in the AFC or in the NFL, in fact, this year, which was a big question in his game, especially since they lost Zach Moss to injury, and has added an ability to catch the ball, which apparently Joe Burrow has joked was a result of him getting LASIK and being able to see the ball.
I love it. Joe Burrow's got such a great personality. You get to see it on the Hard Knocks AFC North and everything. And man, I love just the multiplicity of the weapons that the Bengals have at their disposal, and how Joe Burrow, just like he did back in 2019 at LSU, he spreads the ball around with the best of them, and he knows how to find open guys. As you look defensively for this Bengals team, obviously this has been, you talk about this, both of these teams against winning record teams this season. It's kind of tough because more than half the league stinks and is terrible. There's like, everybody's got 8 or more losses, it feels like. But at the same time, these two teams might be the 2 best teams in the NFL if it came down to 1-score games. Like if you flip the result of 1-score games, these teams would be awesome. We wouldn't even be worried right now, Jake. We'd be sitting here talking about what seed are we going to be, 1 or 2. But at the same time, defensively, the breakdowns for the Bengals this year, it's been a real issue. What's the storyline now going into this matchup against Denver and a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix?
I would say the bigger stories for the Bengals are on the defensive side of the ball, because the offense has been so steady all year. They've only had a couple of down games, like I talked about. Joe Burrow playing at such a high level and those weapons doing what they need to do, even though there is questions on the offensive line. Didn't even talk about a couple of injured offensive linemen that I should have mentioned. Amarius Mims, who had an ankle injury last week, the rookie right tackle really coming into his own, and Orlando Brown, who's trying to come back this week. Those guys going through walkthrough on Tuesday, according to head coach Zach Taylor. And big questions there. That actually might be the biggest story on offense, and I'm just now mentioning. But you asked about the defense, and the question is really, has anything they've done in the last 3 weeks been enough to build the confidence that they can translate it to a game against a real NFL quarterback? Because they've done it against Cooper Rush, against Will Levis and Mason Rudolph, and against Dorian Thompson-Robinson and the Cleveland Browns. And if you're a Broncos fan and aren't paying attention to some of those teams very much, maybe you don't know who those guys are. I wouldn't blame you. Some of these backup level quarterbacks the Bengals have played, maybe they've been around long enough that everybody knows who they are at this point. But jokes aside, it seems like you got a real quarterback in Bo Nix and a real offense that Sean Payton is running with the Denver Broncos. And the test for this defense, much more significant this week. And so still looking for some of these young guys on this Bengals defense, where they've spent all these premium draft picks on guys that we're still waiting to see. Are they going to hit? Are they going to show that they should be part of this team's future? Can they continue that against a team that is a little bit better, that can run the ball if they stick to it, that has a quarterback that won't necessarily make the kind of mistakes they've seen from Will Levis, Mason Rudolph, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson the last couple of weeks, and even Cooper Rush with the Dallas Cowboys a few weeks before, where they just couldn't hit open receivers. There are also a couple of pretty good weapons on that Denver offense, and a better offensive line, I would say, than they faced for several weeks as well, where the pass rush has been a big question mark for the Bengals all year, whereas Trey Hendrickson being awesome and desperation to try to find someone to supplement him on a more consistent basis, where the gap between number 1 and number 2 in total pressures on the year for the Bengals defense is like 50, because Trey Hendrickson has 70 plus and the next guy's in the 20s. You know what I mean? So there are these young guys in the secondary where they've had injuries, the need to get a pass rush going, injuries at the linebacker position really seeming to cause them to take a step back there. And a defense has just been maligned this year, putting it together the last few weeks. Big test for them this week to show that they can continue that against a more competent offense.
You can stay up to date all year on the Cincinnati Bengals, subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Bengals on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, 2 rookie quarterbacks throw down with a trip to the playoffs on the line. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff. They'll show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON, spelled LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Commanders quarterback Jaden Daniels has been no stranger to tense contests and clutch performances. However, this week's challenge against the Falcons, who are desperate for a win, could prove to be a little different.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Look, if the Atlanta Falcons beat the Washington Commanders and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers lose to the Carolina Panthers, then they win the NFC South and are going to go to the postseason. For the Washington Commanders, if the Washington Commanders win and beat the Atlanta Falcons, they're in the playoffs. If the Tampa Bay Buccaneers lose to the Carolina Panthers, then the Commanders are in the playoffs regardless of what happens Sunday night. So basically what we're saying is that everybody watching this show right now is a Carolina Panther fan this weekend because, of course, Commanders fans, as much as you want to see them beat the Falcons, you would love to just come into Sunday night and just be able to enjoy the game without the stress of playoff seeding hanging over your head. Aaron, I want to ask you more about Michael Penix because obviously one game, right? Dan Quinn talked about him earlier this week to us in a press conference, said that he came in as part of that infamous mass visit that the Washington Commanders had, took them all to Top Golf and did all this stuff and allegedly ruffled the feathers of the quarterback they actually ended up taking, who has not had his feathers ruffled, I promise you. But Dan said Michael Penix, his leadership, his strength has always kind of shown through, his arm talent, all those things. Basically, the reason they kind of came off of him on the draft board and didn't really consider him for number 2 overall was because he just doesn't play the same style of football they were looking to play, which is the Jaden Daniels run and gun. You know, I've talked about this with Commanders fans who have been frustrated about the lack of short yardage passes to guys like Luke McCaffrey. Jaden Daniels' check down is running the ball. How do you describe Michael Penix Jr.'s game, even though you've only seen him for one start so far?
Yeah, so far, his game is very much more of, I'm going to run the offense. My checkdowns are actually checkdowns to the running backs and tight ends, rather than, doing the thing that Jaden Daniels has done so well this year, which is, if it doesn't come open, I'll just run it in. There's a pretty good chance that I can bust this thing for like a 20-yard gain or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, you took a bad thing and you made it into a very big positive. And I think with Michael Penix, the thing that stood out in his start was the poise, his ability to execute the offense at a fairly high level, considering like it wasn't like the greatest start. You probably look at the stats and you're like, okay, what's that impressive about, his stat line, 18 for 27 or whatever it was, for 202 yards and an interception. That really wasn't his fault, but it was just really with going back to the illustrious month of Kirktober, where you saw, Kirk Cousins being able to get the ball into the hands of his playmakers. That's something that Michael Penix was able to do this past Sunday, and just looking like a quarterback that, wasn't making his first NFL start, but really kind of making his 14th or 15th NFL start in that sort of comfort in the offense and operating at a high level.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because, I go back to the draft season, right? And I remember you talking about this specifically, like a lot of people criticize the Atlanta Falcons for taking the quarterback after spending all the money on a quarterback and not giving him weapons, a la the Green Bay Packers when they drafted Jordan Love and didn't help Aaron Rodgers out. But it was repeated during that time. Like, this isn't about the player, Michael Penix Jr. This is about the team decision and the franchise direction and all these other things. So now you see Michael Penix step on the field And I think you say the word poise, and that really strikes me because Jaden Daniels has been complimented for his poise. Bo Nix has been complimented for his poise. Now Michael Penix Jr. is being complimented for the same. Drake May, I'm not fully tuned into his beginning of his career, but I know there have been times where he's also been complimented for similar type of things. And I think what it boils down to, man, a lot of it is the right fit for the right young quarterback. When you look at Zach Robinson, the offensive coordinator, you know this, coming from the Rams, Matt Stafford, Jared Goff, pocket passers, guys who like to stand tall in the pocket and kind of do those things. So Michael Penix Jr. kind of fitting into that role. It seems to fit. Like, I don't know how much he would want to do things with like a Jaden Daniels or JJ McCarthy type, but obviously he has experience with this type of quarterback. So I'm glad that it's working out. And I think a lot of Commanders fans are glad it's working out for Michael Penix Jr., just not this Sunday. On the other side of things, to help out Michael Penix Jr., all right, we're going to talk about Michael Penix versus Jaden Daniels, but really Jaden Daniels is going to face that Falcons defense. I'm a massive fan of Jesse Bates. So I want to ask you first off, how has Jesse done with the Atlanta Falcons? But overall, how is that defense looking? Specifically, is there a pass rush developing down in Georgia?
Yeah, Jesse Bates is playing great. He had a pick six last week. We've been missing those sort of game-changing plays from Jesse Bates this year, not because he hasn't been, in a position to make them, but it's just other issues on the defense have not necessarily performed at the level that you want to allow Jesse Bates to be put in a position to make those sort of game-changing plays. But the last couple of weeks, the defense has made major strides, particularly with the pass rush that, depending on sort of what version of pass rush metrics that you look at, whether it's win rate or sack percentage or total sacks or whatever, basically the Falcons are either like number one or number two in terms of sacks since their week 12 bye. And so I think that's going to be a huge part of their ability to keep a player like Jaden Daniels contained, where Washington has been very effective with the QB run game. As we mentioned before, Jaden Daniels' ability to just kind of, when the secondary and the back seven lock it down in coverage, I'll just take off and run. And the Falcons have really struggled against mobile quarterbacks throughout this season. But, you go back to when this pass rush first came alive a couple of weeks ago against the Chargers and Justin Herbert. They did a much better job sort of corralling Justin Herbert because they were able to sort of not only get pressure, but when he did look to run and scramble and extend plays outside the pocket, they were able to get him down on the ground to create those negative plays in terms of sacks. And so the hope is that they can do something similar with Jaden Daniels. It's going to be a challenge. The Falcons do not quite have the level of athleticism at the linebacker position, nor do they really have the depth at the safety position, especially with Jesse Bates being their most talented guy sort of patrolling on the back end, to sort of just say, okay, go spy Jaden Daniels. And so it's really going to be up to that front to really sort of keep him contained more so than, one individual player in the back seven being able to spy him.
Yeah, and that's something, man, I'll tell you, I think the best performance I've seen the defense have against Jaden Daniels honestly was the Philadelphia Eagles. Not this last weekend, but the Thursday night that they played back in week 11. Vic Fangio, known for not wanting to sack the box anyway, but didn't sack the box at all against him, was able to get home with that front a little bit more, keep things spread out, keep people in front of Jaden Daniels to contain him. This last week, however, Aaron, not as much success, not nearly as much success. Jaden Daniels over 300 yards of offense, accounted for the leading rusher for the team. We'll talk a little bit more about that kind of stuff coming up here in a minute, but how much can the Falcons try to emulate that style? Can the Falcons contain Jaden Daniels without overcommitting more rushers to try to pressure him? Because that is how defenses get gashed by him, is by leaving lanes open, because you bring 6 rushers, you're going to have Green in front of them.
Well, the Falcons like to rush 4 and rush 3 a lot. So I think that's going to be sort of their strategy, which is we'll drop 8 and that will have more bodies underneath, that if he does decide to tuck it and run, we'll have more guys that hopefully will have the proper angle in order to tackle him. But as you've seen many times, and you saw this last week against Philadelphia, Jaden Daniels can outrun some angles. He's done that throughout his career, even going back to his college days. So that's going to be a challenge for the Falcons. But I think by and large, they're going to try to bring 4 with some of their simulated pressure looks, especially with that 4th guy being Caden Ellis, their middle linebacker, who's been one of their more productive pass rushers over these last 6-7 games, as well as Arnold Ebiketie, who loves the speed rush. He's been able to win a lot with the speed rush the last couple of weeks, but getting, too far upfield with Jaden Daniels being able to just sort of step up in the pocket and then, break contain will be a challenge. So I think those 2 guys, along with the rest of the Falcons 4-man pass rush, will be tasked with trying to keep Jaden Daniels corralled. It's going to be a challenge for the Falcons, just because I don't know if they have a Nolan Smith. I don't know if they have a Josh Sweat, those types of guys, a Jalen Carter type of guy that can really sort of dominate and win his one-on-ones in the ways that you've seen with that Philadelphia front. So I think because of the recent success of the pass rush, I think they have a better shot than I would have told you, any point during the season, but it is definitely going to be a challenge.
If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, well, the Vikings proved themselves legit against the Packers, so at least until tomorrow, stay Locked On Sports Today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.